Hello, welcome to this video. We're going to be looking quickly today at the template system in the latest release of Marva, and we're going to be going over how the templates work and how to create them within the interface of Marva, and going to go over how to create a new resource based off a template you created or load an existing resource into a template you created. So in Marva, there are two ideas of how to work on a record. One is that we've always had, which is profiles, and these are it's a structural information about how a BibFrame record should be displayed in the editor. What fields should should appear, what lookups or APIs should be used to populate some of those fields, for example, like name fields, creator contributor fields, subject fields, stuff like that. And so the profiles have always been here. You would either start from scratch if you wanted to just have a completely blank record, or you would use the load existing screen to find a record in BFDB and then load it into one of these existing profiles. So the new addition is this idea of templates, which is basically, you could think of it as kind of a partially filled out profile. So it's one of these existing profiles that has data populated in it, but it also records some more information around like the number of separate components in it. So for example, if there was, 4 different empty subject components, it would keep track of that. And other sorts of kind of like details that aren't necessarily stored in BibFrame data, but it's kind of the metadata about how to edit a record and how that record should look like in Marva to edit it. So the templates are all based off of an existing profile. So to get started, you have to open an existing profile and then change it somehow. So we're going to just make a very simple template here. So I'm on the Create New Record page, and I'm going to open a new blank monograph profile. And so has very little, almost no BibFrame data behind it yet. It's just the profile showing what fields should be displayed, and then I would go through and populate them, right? So I'm just going to simply add a title. And once I've done that, this is actually, a fully formed, it can be turned into a BibFrame record and posted to BFDB. It'll be, extremely minimal, but it is a record. And so that would exist, I could post it and it would be sent off to BFDB. So what I can also do with this now, though, is instead of posting it, I can, and you can also save it to Marva backend. So this record would always be here in my records, and I can go back into here and load it, right? But what you can also do is save this off as a template now. And so basically, you're going to be creating a profile like piece of data that you can then use to load again later. And so, if I wanted to basically come through here and populate a bunch of fields that I populate over and over again with the same values, or if I'm doing a run of resources that are going to have the same values populated, and I just want that data in there by default when I start working on it, this is where a profile can be useful for your workflow. So say I go through here and I populate all the information that I'm happy with, then I want to save this off as my own template. There's this button up here called Create Template. And when you click on this, it shows this screen. And this screen basically is the screen that allows you to create the new template. And so really you only have two things that you can fill out here. But the one thing you have to populate is the template name. So I'm just going to call this just the title. And that's just the name of the template. I'm going to call it that. And then the part over here is basically a little more complicated about how the data should work when you're integrating a template and an existing resource. So we're not going to worry about that yet. We're just going to populate the title and then click create this template. And so the one key thing to think about is when you're working in Marva and you're creating templates is that you're never really editing a template. You're always on a resource, right? It just so happens that you can save that resource off as a template to use later, but you're always working on a resource, and you can always, post this since I clicked this button and to create, it didn't magically convert this resource into a template. There's really no such thing as a template. They're all just resources, and you're just kind of changing one and saving it in time to use later. The key thing with templates is though is that whenever you reopen that, it's going to be aware about that, and it's going to change the URIs for the resource if you're opening up a new one, or it's going to be the URI of the resource you're editing if you're loading one from BFDB. So since I clicked on that and I said create, I'm still on this resource. I could of course just keep posting this, but if I go back to my home screen, I can see now that the template I just created here shows up now in this list. And so this will list off all the templates that you can create, and it will show you some basic metadata about it. Basically saying, this template has a work resource in it and an instance resource in it, and then a couple other options we'll talk about in a second. But one of the things you might want to do is say if you are creating a bunch of resources that are always going to have the same values in certain fields, right? And so this would mean there is an existing record you're cataloging from scratch. And so what you can do is as soon as you click on this, it's going to open up that template as a resource, right? It's going to give it a new URI, so this is a completely different resource, but it's going to populate those values that you had defined earlier. So each time you open this, it's going to be a new resource, but it's going to be pre-populated with all the information that you populated earlier. Of course, you can make more changes to this. Add some other data. And you could even add, say, add a new instance. So now this has two instances. Instance one, call that instance title one. And you could save this now off as a template, right? So you're never really editing a template, you're just creating new templates. I'll call this one just title with two instances. I'll create that. Now, if I go back home, I could post this or do whatever I wanted with it. It's just a normal resource in Marva. If I go back here, now I have another template that I can do. And it tells me here that there's actually two instances on this template, right? So if I open up this one, it become populated with two instances already ready to go. And other kind of metadata things about or kind of configurations about the profile you're working on are saved as well. So say, for example, that I know I'm always going to want to have 3 genre forms fields. I'm not going to pre-populate them with anything, or you could. I'll pre-populate that one, but maybe they're going to change each time or something like that. But I know I always have 3 of them or something like that, right? So it really is dependent on your workflow. So again, I'm not editing the template I was just on. This is just another resource, but I can save this off as a template to use later. So I'm going to create a new template here, and I'll say just title 3 instances, 3 genre forms, something like that. So now if I go back here, I'll see I have another template I created, and I can open up that one, and it will automatically have those 3 fields ready to go. And remember, I set the thesaurus for one of them, right? So anything you kind of change in this view and save as a template, it's going to be ready to go, set to go in the new template that you save off as. And again, every time you open it, they're going to be different URIs on each resource. So these are new resources that you're creating when you open them this way. They're just ready to go with some data pre-populated that you defined. All right. So that's one way of working with templates, is that if you're going to be starting from scratch and you want to just kind of have some pre-populated data on a blank record each time you open it. Another one could be that you are going to be loading data in from an existing resource, so a record you were able to find in BFDB and load into Marva, and you want the template to interact with that data somehow. And so this is a little bit more complicated, and it has a little bit more of a complicated interface to kind of tell you how you want that interaction to happen, right? So right now, when you load an existing resource into BFDB, so I'm just going to load this resource here. I'm going to load it into the monograph profile, right? So it took that data from BibFrame database, and it just populated all of it into the monograph profile. And the monograph profile is empty, right? There's no data in there yet. So it just fills in all the data, adds more components, more fields when are needed here, like the genre form. And it just tries its best to display all the data that's in its record that fits to the profile, right? And the profile restricts to what properties can be displayed and stuff like that. So what this is pretty straightforward in the sense that the profile is empty of data. So there's nothing needs to, no logic needs to be there when it's merging it into the profile. What can be different now though is that you can define a template that's going to have data in it, right? So let me delete these other ones that we created, and now we're just back with this just title template. Um, and so this just title template just has the title defined here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this title, and I'm going to go up here to create a new template, right? So even though I loaded this, I opened it from a template, this is still just a new resource. And so if I create a template off of this one, it's going to create a new template based off this resource. I'm not editing the existing template. So if I click this template button, right, so I still have to give it a name. So I'm going to call this data merge test with the title. And so now this is where this right-hand section comes into play, because you can get very specific on how you want your template to interact with data being loaded into it from an existing resource. So you have a couple options of what could happen if you think about it when you take a existing resource and you have a template and you kind of merge them together. So in our example, we populated just one field, the title field. There's some other default values in this profile, like the content type. I think defaults to text, and admin metadata is always going to be there. And then on the instance, there's a couple of default values. So that's why these are showed up here, because there's the profile has those defaults already, so they're in there. But the only thing that we really changed was the title. And so what we need to decide is, okay, so say I want to use this template to merge with an existing resource. And I need to decide how I want it to behave, that data coming in from the resource to behave with my template. And so this could be a situation where you're it's additive, right? So you're always going to be adding stuff in your template that does not yet exist in the existing resource. So say you're doing an IBC or SIP or something like that that has some fields populated, but you know that you're always going to be adding a certain field to that record, and you do that same field over and over again for this run of resources. So you don't want to you want to always populate. So in that case, you'd always want the value in the template to appear. But in that situation, if there's no data in the resource for that field, then it doesn't matter, right? It's always going to be just the value in the template appearing in your record. But it could be the situation where both of the template and the resource have the same data field, right? So in our case, everything has a title, and we just created our own title. And so in this hypothetical situation, we'd have to decide, okay, what do we want it to happen when you load a resource into this template and it already has a title, and I have a title defined. So you have three options here. One, you could say, this is the default option, and you just say keep both. So it will always just keep both. It will create both of those fields, the value from your template and the value from the resource. So in this case, the title, if the resource has a title, which it will, then it will just populate both my title from the template and whatever title is in the resource coming into the template. The other option is to say, I don't care about my value in my template. If it actually is present in the resource, then just overwrite the template value with whatever is in the resource, right? So, for something like title, it's just going to preference the resource title over whatever's in the template, and whatever you put into the template title field will not appear in the final merged record when you're editing it. The other option is, ignore whatever title is in the resource and just use my template title that I've added. And so in this case, it's very straightforward because we're talking about one property, but you can imagine you'd have to have a little bit of a strategy for how you want to handle different fields based on your workflow and how you want certain fields to overwrite each other, right? So let's say that we do always want our title to overwrite the resource title. So I'm just going to select, say, template. So for this property, the BF title property, the template value will always take precedent over the resource value. And so I gave it a name up here, and I'm going to hit create. So now if I head back here, I see I have this new template here, but if we're going to be loading data, an existing resource into the template, we don't do that from this create new record screen, right? Because this is pretty much just to create records from scratch. We're going to be doing that from the load existing record screen. And so in this screen, you can search by LCCN, and you can also, just if you're in BFTB, you can load directly from BFTB. So let's load directly from BFTB. I'm going to close everything else and just have the BFTB record open for this, right? So this is just, a straightforward monograph. It does have a title, a main title. And so I'm going to say, okay, edit this in Marva. And it's going to load in Marva and populate the package URL. And it's going to give me some suggestions. So I don't want to open this just in an empty profile like we normally do. I want to load it into one of my existing templates that I've defined and we just created. And so the one we want to load it into is called data merge test with the title. And that's the one where we said, okay, I want the title to take the title in the template to take precedent over whatever value is coming in from the resource. So if I pick this option, if I say, okay, load this resource into this template, let's see what happens. All right, so you can see it loaded all the data, right, from the resource, everything that was, we saw in the BFTB display, but we can see that the title that was coming from the resource is no longer here, right? It's just the value from the template. So if we're going to change this behavior, we'd have to create a new template. So I went back to the records page in this my templates here, and I'm going to edit the template we were just in, right? And I'm going to change this and say, okay, you know what? Actually, I want this to be both of them. I want to save both the title from the template and from the resource. And of course, I'm not ever editing a template, right? I did open a new record based on the template, but it's still just a new resource. So I have to save this off as a new template. So I'm going to call it just title, but use both titles, something like that. All right, so I'm going to create that. And now I'm back here. Now I have a new template, and I'm going to load existing data. I'm going to close this and go back to BFDB and load it from BFDB. And I'm going to say I want to load using my profile, my templates here that I've created. And here's the one, just title, but use both titles. And so now we can see the behavior where it of both, where it picked, it allowed both the template data and the resource data to kind of bubble through to the final editable resource that you're working on in Marva. So these options give you pretty great flexibility in how you want your data to come over based on the resource you're editing. And, these are choices you'll have to make depending on the workflow for a particular set of resources that you want to use templates for, right? So you'd have to say, okay, for this series of work I'm doing, I know that I'm always going to want to take these from these certain fields from the template, or I'm always going to want to keep these that are in the resource, or what, just show me both of them, and I'll come in here and I'll delete the one that I don't want, right? So I just deleted the value from the template. So it's really up to you, and it's really determined on how you want to work on that specific resource and how you want your template to behave. The last thing I want to show is this idea that you can share templates with somebody else. And so if you have a template that you want to, you maybe spent a lot of time on getting it ready or perfect for a certain run of resources or a certain situation scenario, what you can do is share that with somebody else by clicking on this copy ID button. And the copy ID button will save a an alphanumeric value into your clipboard. So I'm just going to paste this into the URL up here, but it's not a URL. This is just to show you what it looks like. It says alphanumeric code that represents that template that you've created. And so if you were logged in as somebody else, you wouldn't see these templates. So let's just do that as an example here. So I'm going to change. I'm going to log in as someone else. Refresh. And so now, the system thinks I'm somebody else because I changed my cataloger ID, and I have no templates, right? But say the other me, right? I copied that URL and I sent an email saying, "Hey, here's a great template if you're going to be working on these resources that I've set up that you might want to use." And so someone emailed you this code, and now you have this code. So what you can do is open up this copy template ID dropdown and paste the ID in here and say copy. What it will do is duplicate that template over to your account, and so now you have access to that template as well. It's not the same template because really there's never ever the same template. It's always just resources, and you're saving them off as different templates. But now you have access to that template that was defined created by somebody else, and you can go in here and make changes and then save it off again and share that with somebody else if you wanted, etc. Right? So it's just a little system of being able to share templates that you've created that you might find useful. The one last thing that I will say is that these templates are based off of changes in these templates are based off these profiles, right? So if the underlying profile changes, then that could affect the way that um, um, the template you created based off of it works. So say, for example, since we're still in this pilot phase and we're making changes to the conversion, that we need to change the way that the profile is going to be expecting that a BibFrame record's coming in. And so that may affect the template that you've created off of it. And so to get around this, it's going to give you a warning if a template has changed underneath of it. Um, that would require your action. So say a major change was made to the monograph profile, and this template is based off the monograph profile. The system's going to warn you that the profile that this template is based on has changed, and you're going to need to delete it and recreate the template so that you're using the newest version of that profile. So I'm going to pause really quick and go make a change to the monograph profile just to show what that's going to look like. Okay, so I created a new template and I changed the underlying profile in our profile editor. And this is basically what it's going to look like when you get this error message if you see this. So basically it's going to be telling you that the underlying profile has changed, and just as a warning saying you should really delete this this template you've created because the underlying profile is different and that could cause problems further down the line. So there are probably better ways we can deal with this situation and improve it so it's not as dramatic as having to delete the template. But for right now, until we have a sense of how often this happens or how big of an issue this might be, this is kind of the current way it works. So in this case, you can still open it and take a look at it to see what you did and to recreate it. But the best thing to do in this situation is delete this template and then just create a new one, recreate it based off of the new profile that has been changed. So hopefully you don't see that too often because profile changes aren't necessarily constantly happening. They're just mostly when things need to change. And that, like I said earlier, we can look at figuring out better ways of dealing with that as we move forward. But that's it. That's kind of a quick overview of how the template system's working and how to kind of get started with it. And of course, as usual, just let me know if you have any issues and we'll be discussing it more as we go. But thanks for watching and take care. Bye.